month ago, I asked somebody else and I forgot.
You're a liar! You're a filthy fucking no-go liar! You didn't have the guts to tell me the truth!
If you say you don't have a dream, you're just fooling yourself. That line from a quirky record store manager became the thesis for an entire generation of teenagers navigating class warfare in pastel colors and vintage hats. Directed by Howard Deutsch and written by John Hughes, Pretty in Pink hit theaters in 1986 as the third film in Hughes's unofficial trilogy of Molly Ringwald vehicles. Ringwald plays Andie Walsh.
How'd you get in here?
Are you mad?
Yes, I'm mad. There are public bathrooms all over the place.
A poor girl on the wrong side of the tracks who falls for Blaine McDonough, a rich preppy played by Andrew McCarthy. Jon Cryer is Ducky, her best friend hopelessly in love with her. Annie Potts is Iona, the wise mentor. And James Spader is Steph, the villain so perfectly awful he defined preppy cruelty for a decade. What started as a simple class-conscious romance turned into a production nightmare involving test audiences who literally booed the original ending, emergency reshoots with actors wearing wigs, and a soundtrack that had to be rewritten in days. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts about Pretty in Pink. Stick around for number 1, because the ending you know, in quote, wasn't the real ending at all. And the story of how test audiences revolted so hard they forced an entire reshoot is wilder than any prom date disaster. Now, before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe because it really helps the channel grow. Let's get into it with number 15. 15. McCarthy wore a wig for the ending. Andrew McCarthy shaved his head for a Broadway play between filming and the reshoot, so the final romantic scene features him wearing a very obvious wig. The original ending of Pretty in Pink was filmed and completed. Everyone went home. The movie was done. McCarthy immediately started preparing for a stage production that required a completely different look. He cut his hair short, really short, nearly shaved it. Then test audiences saw the original ending and revolted. John Hughes scrambled to write a new 5-page finale. The studio called everyone back for emergency reshoots. McCarthy showed up looking nothing like Blaine. His hair was gone. The character who'd spent the entire movie with preppy feathered hair now looked like he'd joined the military. The production had one day to film the new ending.
She certainly went out and found herself what I'd have to say is probably the most interesting date that our generation went.
Steph.
They couldn't wait for his hair to grow back. So they fitted McCarthy with a wig. And if you watch the final prom scene closely, you can see it. The wig doesn't quite match. The color's slightly off. The texture looks different under the lighting. It sits on his head like a helmet. McCarthy later admitted he felt ridiculous filming the most romantic moment of the movie while wearing fake hair. But they had no choice. The entire ending needed to be reshot immediately, and hair doesn't grow on command. Here's the irony. The ending that saved Pretty in Pink from disaster was filmed with the male lead in a costume wig that nobody was supposed to notice. 14. Molly Ringwald hated the prom dress. Molly Ringwald has openly admitted she thought the iconic pink prom dress was hideous. And she's right. The dress that defined the entire movie, the dress that gave the film its visual identity, the dress that became synonymous with 80s prom culture was, in Ringwald's professional opinion, absolutely terrible. Costume designer Marilyn Vance created the dress specifically for the film. It's a triangular pink disaster with layers and geometric shapes that look like someone weaponized the decade's worst fashion impulses. Ringwald wore it. She smiled through it. She made it work on screen through sheer force of acting talent. But in interviews years later, she's been brutally honest. She hated that dress, thought it was ugly, wondered what Vance was thinking, and the internet agrees. The dress has become famous not for being beautiful, but for being memorably awful. It's the dress everyone remembers specifically because it's so aggressively strange.
He's not coming.
Oh, what?
It's okay. I'm gonna go.
Alone?
Here's what makes this perfect. Pretty in Pink is about an outsider girl who doesn't fit into the wealthy world she's trying to navigate. And the dress is an outsider dress. It doesn't fit into any recognizable prom aesthetic. Andie makes the dress herself from thrift store finds because she can't afford a real prom dress. And it looks exactly like what a creative teenager with limited resources would produce. The dress Ringwald hated became the perfect visual metaphor for the character's struggle. 13. Test audience booed. The original ending? When test audiences saw the original ending where Andie chose Ducky, they didn't just dislike it, they booed, loudly, like a concert crowd rejecting a band. Director Howard Deutsch described the screening as having been like a rock concert up until the final scene. The audience loved everything. They were engaged, laughing, invested. Then Andie and Ducky walked out of prom together as a couple, and the theater erupted in boos. Deutsch later said, "There was booing like I've never heard in my life. Not polite disagreement, not scattered negative reactions, full-throated rejection. The girls in the audience were particularly vocal. 'Forget the politics,' they said. 'We want her to get the cute boy.' They'd spent 90 minutes watching Andie fall for Blaine. They'd invested emotionally in that romance.
Here, what happened?
Well, I guess you're looking at it.
Oh, wow, you look great.
Thanks,
And the ending tried to tell them the nerdy best friend was the right choice all along. They weren't having it. Paramount executives sat in that screening and realized they had a serious problem. They'd made a movie where the ending betrayed everything the audience wanted. So they called John Hughes in a panic. Hughes went home and wrote 5 new pages overnight, and the entire production was hauled back for emergency reshoots. Here's the cosmic justice, the ending. Hughes intended, the one that made thematic sense, the one about class solidarity and friendship over romance, was rejected by the exact demographic the movie was made for. 12. Hughes wrote the new ending in one night. John Hughes received the call about the test audience disaster and wrote an entirely new 5-page ending overnight. The studio needed a solution immediately. They couldn't release a movie where audiences literally booed the climax, but they also couldn't delay release to do major rewrites and reshoots. Hughes went home that night and rewrote the entire ending from scratch, 5 pages, a complete reversal of the emotional arc. In the original ending, Ducky and Andie go to prom together and leave together, implying a romantic future. In Hughes's emergency rewrite, Ducky becomes the supportive best friend who sacrifices his feelings and gives Blaine his blessing. Hughes also created a new character on the spot, a girl who shows interest in Ducky at the prom, played by Kristy Swanson in her first theatrical role. This character existed solely to give Ducky a consolation prize so he wouldn't seem pathetic. The new ending was written, approved, and scheduled for filming within days. The entire cast was called back. One soundstage was dressed to look like the Los Angeles Hotel ballroom from the original prom scene, and they filmed it in a single day. Here's what's remarkable. Hughes didn't want to change the ending. He believed in his original vision, but he was professional enough to recognize when his vision conflicted with audience demand. So he wrote a new ending that audiences would love, even though he personally disagreed with it. Years later, Hughes admitted he still preferred the original ending, but the version that made Pretty in Pink a hit was the one he wrote under duress in one desperate night. 11. They hated each other on set. Molly Ringwald had a crush on Andrew McCarthy. He didn't reciprocate, and director Howard Deutsch used their mutual hatred to create perfect on-screen chemistry. They hated each other, Deutsch told Den of Geek years later. They hated each other because Molly had a crush on him, and he did not have a crush on her. Ringwald was 16, playing a girl desperately in love with a rich boy, and she was actually desperately crushing on her co-star, who found her annoying. McCarthy resented that she was the foundation of the movie. Ringwald resented that he didn't like her back. The tension escalated throughout filming. Deutsch recognized the problem immediately, but instead of trying to fix it, he weaponized it.
We just got these glasses and it's really,
Yeah, I didn't like that album I got.
He lied to both of them. To Ringwald, "Oh no, he really does have a crush on you, but he's a guy, so he's afraid to show you." The lie worked. Luckily for me, it added to the sexual tension, Deutsch explained. It helped the whole sense of, are these guys really going to get together or not? Jon Cryer absorbed all of it, watched McCarthy dismiss Ringwald, watched Ringwald pine for McCarthy, and channeled it into Ducky's hopeless worship of Andie. Here's the irony. The most romantic movie of the 80s was built on unrequited love behind the camera that mirrored unrequited love on screen. Real heartbreak, creating fictional heartbreak, creating real emotion in millions of viewers. 10. Annie Potts improvised the applause scene. The iconic applause, applause, applause moment where Iona admires her record store window display wasn't in the script. Annie Potts made it up on the spot during the first scene of the first day of filming. Director Howard Deutsch was terrified.
Applause, applause, applause. This is beautiful.
This was his first feature film. He'd never directed a movie before. He showed up on set day one with massive imposter syndrome and a fear that everything would collapse. The first scene they filmed was Iona in the record store window. Simple setup. She's arranging a display. Potts finished the display, stepped back to admire her work, and spontaneously started clapping while saying, applause, applause, applause to herself. Complete improvisation. Not in the script, not discussed beforehand. Deutsch later said, that wasn't in the script. Annie improv'd right at the top, and I was like, thank God. She's going to create an amazing character. And then John fell in love with her too. That one improvised moment on day one set the tone for Iona's entire character. The quirky, self-amused energy, the person who creates her own entertainment, the mentor who doesn't take herself too seriously. And it happened because Potts felt confident enough to play on the first take of the first day. Here's the beautiful irony: the director was terrified he couldn't handle actors, and his lead supporting actress immediately proved she'd carry the creative weight by inventing character moments he never would have thought to write. 9. Cryer thought they hated him. Jon Cryer spent the entire production convinced Molly Ringwald and Andrew McCarthy were irritated by him. He wasn't wrong. I think they were irritated by me from day one, Cryer wrote in his 2015 memoir. Molly and Andrew were very reserved people, and I'm a very outgoing person. McCarthy later admitted Cryer was needy, and he had no patience for it. Cryer was 20, playing an outcast desperately seeking attention.
I don't have any place to go. I like coming here. Excuse me very much.
It's okay. I'm sorry for getting mad at you. I gotta get back out in front, okay?
And in real life, he was desperately seeking connection from co-stars who found him exhausting. The dynamic fed Ducky perfectly. The character who tries too hard and gets rejected becomes a guy trying too hard with castmates who rejected him. There was one scene where it all exploded. Ducky was supposed to get mad at Andie for showing up at the club with Blaine. Ringwald and McCarthy decided to egg Cryer on from behind the camera to get a strong reaction. They kept pestering him, pushing him, making him genuinely furious. The reaction you see in the film is Cryer getting legitimately angry at his co-stars for harassing him. Years later, Ringwald felt terrible. I still feel so bad that he felt that way because I never had any problems with John, she told Vogue. But here's the beautiful accident. Cryer feeling like an unwanted outsider made Ducky feel like an unwanted outsider. Real rejection created fictional rejection. The movie about not fitting in starred an actor who didn't fit in with his own cast. 8. If You Leave was written in days. Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark wrote If You Leave in a matter of days for the emergency reshoot ending. It became one of the most iconic 80s songs ever recorded. When the original ending was scrapped, there was already a song written for it. The Psychedelic Furs had composed Goddess of Love, specifically for the Andie/Ducky ending. But that song didn't work for the new Andie/Blaine ending. Different emotional tone, different narrative arc. So, OMD was contacted in a panic. The studio needed a new song immediately, something romantic, something that fit the vibe of two people reuniting at prom. OMD wrote If You Leave under massive time pressure. They had days, not weeks. The reshoot was already scheduled. The song needed to be finished, recorded, and ready. They delivered. And If You Leave became an instant classic. It hit number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. It became OMD's biggest American hit, and it's remained a staple of 80s nostalgia and prom playlists for nearly 40 years. A song written in desperation under impossible time constraints became more famous than anything else in the movie. Here's the cosmic justice. The original ending had a Psychedelic Furs song nobody remembers. The emergency reshoot got an OMD song that defined an entire generation's understanding of romance. Sometimes the best art comes from panic. Sometimes deadline pressure creates magic that careful planning never could. 7. Ducky was based on Ringwald's gay best friend. Molly Ringwald later revealed that Ducky was based on her real-life best friend, who was gay. and she and that friend had an extremely non-romantic relationship. This explains everything about why the original ending felt wrong. Ringwald understood intuitively that Andie and Ducky weren't romantic, because the real relationship that inspired the character was never romantic. It was deep friendship between a girl and her gay best friend. In the 80s, that dynamic couldn't be explicitly stated in a mainstream teen movie, so Ducky's queerness was coded rather than explicit. The flamboyant fashion, the theatrical personality, the intense devotion to a female friend he could never actually be with. Jon Cryer has said he played Ducky as potentially queer, though he left it ambiguous, and Ringwald confirmed years later.
You know what an older woman does for me?
Changes your diapers?
Touche. No, seriously though, you're a very smoky alternative for this. It's a duck man's love and life.
That the character's DNA came from a gay friendship, which makes the test audience reaction even more interesting. They booed the idea of Andie choosing Ducky because on some level they understood he wasn't a viable romantic option, not because of class, because of something deeper the movie couldn't say out loud. Here's the irony. Hughes wrote an ending where the girl chooses her best friend, but the best friend was coded as gay, which made the romantic ending feel false. So, audiences rejected it. And Hughes was forced to write the heterosexual romance ending instead. The movie that tried to transcend class barriers ended up reinforcing heteronormative romance because the alternative felt inauthentic to the character's queerness that couldn't be openly acknowledged. 6. Robin Wright auditioned for every Ringwald role. Robin Wright, Penn auditioned for every single role in every John Hughes movie that eventually went to Molly Ringwald, and never got cast. Everyone. 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink. Wright showed up, read for the parts, and demonstrated her talent, and Hughes kept choosing Ringwald. It wasn't personal. Ringwald had become Hughes's muse. He wrote specifically for her voice, her mannerisms, her particular brand of teenage authenticity. But imagine being Robin Wright. You're a talented young actress. You keep auditioning for the defining teen roles of the decade, and you keep losing to the same person. Wright eventually carved out her own successful career. House of Cards, Wonder Woman, Forrest Gump. She became a bigger star than almost anyone from the Brat Pack era, but in the mid-80s, she was the actress who couldn't book a John Hughes film. Here's the cosmic justice. Ringwald's career peaked with Hughes.
Oh, I am. Last night he asked me. I don't know, I said yes.
When he stopped making teen movies, her star power faded. She became forever associated with a very specific moment in cinema. Wright missed out on that moment, but she built a career with more longevity, more range, more sustained success. Ringwald got the iconic roles but became trapped by them. Wright got rejected but stayed free to become whoever she wanted. Sometimes losing the part you desperately want opens doors to better opportunities you never imagined. 5. McCarthy was hungover. The entire movie. Andrew McCarthy was struggling with alcoholism during Pretty in Pink. He filmed the entire movie hungover, and everyone thought his constant headaches made him look sensitive and romantic. "I was so hungover for that whole movie," McCarthy admitted years later to ABC News. "I'm thinking, God, I got a headache. I am just dying here. I gotta go lie down." But on film, it came across as wounded vulnerability. Viewers saw a sensitive rich boy struggling with feelings he didn't understand. Critics praised his delicate performance. Nobody knew he was just massively hungover and trying not to vomit.
Andy, I'm having a bad day. Can we talk later?
No? What about
Come
prom?
on, why don't we just meet after school?
No!
McCarthy had started drinking at age 12. By the time Pretty in Pink filmed in 1986, he was a functional alcoholic. He'd booze it up at night, show up to set, feeling like death, and still hit his lines perfectly. Director Howard Deutsch didn't know. Molly Ringwald didn't know. Jon Cryer didn't know. The tabloids didn't know. Everyone just thought McCarthy was a brooding, sensitive heartthrob who naturally embodied romantic confusion. Here's the devastating irony. McCarthy's substance abuse struggle created the exact vulnerability that made Blaine feel real. His physical suffering translated to emotional suffering on camera. The performance that launched him as a romantic lead was powered by addiction nobody detected. 4. Steph was supposed to get kicked. In the original script, Blaine was supposed to kick Steph in the crotch at the end instead of just telling him off. Test audiences cringed so hard they cut it. The climax features Blaine finally standing up to his awful best friend Steph, who's been the villain throughout the entire film. James Spader plays him with such perfectly calibrated preppy cruelty that you desperately want him to face consequences. The script called for Blaine to physically assault Steph. Specifically, kick him between the legs. Hard. They filmed it. Blaine confronts Steph, winds up, and delivers a brutal kick to Steph's groin. Test audiences watched it and collectively winced. The physical violence felt too harsh, too mean, too much for a teen romance. So the scene was recut. Blaine still confronts Steph, but instead of kicking him, he just verbally eviscerates him and walks away. The same message, the same emotional beat, but without the physical assault. Here's what's interesting. Audiences rejected violence against the villain, but demanded the romantic ending. They wanted Andie to get Blaine, but they didn't want Blaine to physically harm anyone to prove his worth. Even in their revenge fantasies, 1986 teenagers had limits. The moral victory was enough. The kick was too much. And Spader's Steph remains one of cinema's great unpunched villains. He faces social humiliation, but never physical pain. 3. Anthony Michael Hall turned down Ducky. Anthony Michael Hall was offered the role of Ducky and turned it down. The actor who defined John Hughes' nerd archetype didn't want to play another quirky outsider. Hall had been Hughes' go-to awkward teenager. The geek in 16 Candles, Brian in The Breakfast Club, Gary in Weird Science. He'd created the template for the lovable nerd character. And Ducky was basically that character in love with the female lead. Hall said no. He wanted to move past the nerd roles, wanted to be taken seriously, wanted to show range. So the role went to Jon Cryer, who made it iconic with his Otis Redding lip sync and his pointy-toed shoes and his heartbreaking unrequited devotion. Cryer turned Ducky into one of the most beloved characters in 80s cinema. The role defined his career. He's still answering questions about it decades later. Hall moved on to other projects, tried to escape the Hughes universe, and his career never recovered the same momentum. By the 90s, Cryer was a working actor with a signature role. Hall was struggling to find parts that matched his early success. Here's the irony. Hall rejected Ducky to avoid being typecast as the quirky nerd, but rejecting the role didn't free him from typecasting. It just meant he wasn't the quirky nerd anyone remembered. Cryer accepted the role and got typecast. But he got typecast as a character people loved. 2. Deutsch had never directed a movie. Howard Deutsch had never directed a feature film before Pretty in Pink. His first day on set was his first day ever directing a movie. Paramount gave a $6 to $7 million production to a complete novice because nobody thought it would be a big deal. They had major films like The Untouchables that they cared about. Pretty in Pink was just a small teen movie they could hand to an untested director. Deutsch was terrified. He later admitted that even his therapist told him not to take the job. His own mental health professional thought it was a bad idea, but Deutsch took it anyway. And he showed up day one with no feature film experience, no safety net, and no idea if he could actually pull it off. The first scene was Annie Potts improvising, and Deutsch realized his actors were going to save him. He leaned into their instincts, let them create, trusted their choices, and made a movie that grossed $40.5 million and became a cultural touchstone. Here's the beautiful irony. Paramount didn't care about Pretty in Pink. It was a throwaway project for a novice director, so they left him alone. No executive interference, no micromanaging, just make your little teen movie and stay out of the way of the important films. That lack of oversight gave Deutsch freedom, and that freedom produced a hit. 1. Hughes hated the new ending. John Hughes died in 2009, still believing the original ending was better. He never made peace with the test audience decision. Hughes had written Pretty in Pink as a story about class solidarity, about choosing the person who understands your struggle over the person who represents escape from it. Andie and Ducky came from the same world. They understood each other's limitations and strengths. Blaine was the fantasy, the escape, the betrayal of where she came from. Hughes wanted Andie to choose authenticity over fantasy, to choose the friend who'd always been there over the rich boy who offered an exit. The test audience wanted the fairy tale, and Hughes gave it to them. But he never forgave himself for caving. A year after Pretty in Pink, Hughes made Some Kind of Wonderful. It's basically Pretty in Pink with the genders flipped, And this time, the protagonist chooses the best friend, the way Hughes originally wanted. Some Kind of Wonderful was Hughes's do-over, his chance to make the ending he believed in without test audience interference. Here's the tragedy. Pretty in Pink became iconic. Some Kind of Wonderful is barely remembered, the ending. Hughes hated made Pretty in Pink a classic. The ending he wanted made Some Kind of Wonderful a footnote. Sometimes you have to let go of what you wanted to create what people need. And there you have it, 15 weird and wild facts about Pretty in Pink. Which facts surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments and share this with a friend who still argues about whether Andie should have chosen Ducky. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about movies that became classics by accident. See you in the next one.